What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another look at recent sales prices for loose graded vintage Star Wars figures. And we're going to start off this batch with a bunch of beautiful Spanish figures that sold over in the UK. We've got Spanish Pox, the early version of the Spanish figures where they imported Hong Kong parts and then assembled and painted them in Spain. So they are the early Spanish figures, the Spanish Pox. And then the later version is the Spanish PBP, where they used their own molds and assembled and painted them in Spain. They usually have a scar, COO, on the back where they dug out the Hong Kong mold. So lots of good ones there. And then we also have some Last 17 and nice comparisons between UKG graded Last 17 and AFA Last 17 where appropriate. So let's go ahead and dig in. And before I go any further, I did want to mention this recent Instagram post by AFA. AFA announced the other day that they are back up and running in a new expanded facility. They added new team members and upgraded equipment. And they said they look forward to reopening our loose graded department sometime this year. They're also going to reintroduce premium memberships and other anticipated projects in 2024. It's been a long time since they stopped taking loose submissions over at AFA, but apparently it's coming back. So for those of you that are sitting on a bunch of figures that have been waiting for AFA, we'll see how long it takes. It could be another year, who knows? But apparently that is in the works over at AFA. They have expanded their facility. So just wanted to pass that information along. All right, let's dig in. So this was an interesting one, and I like how the seller, the Muffin Man, who I've bought from before, I like how he titled it. He called it the Lincoln Beard variant of the Spanish Pac ObiWan Kenobi graded UKG 85%. And if you look at him, it's a factory error where the mustache was not painted. And you see that a lot with Spanish figures, poor paint applications, things like that. And you can see some overspray on the hands, pale hands. So there you go. It's kind of an interesting variation. They gave it the UKG 85%. Obviously, it does have some paint defects, but every Spanish Pac figure usually does. It's very, very hard to find them in high grade, and this is about as high grade as you'll find for them. So I call this one the Mascara Kenobi because he's got those big, dark eyes. And, you know, it also has wider heels on the feet. It's just kind of a characteristic mold for it. Here's the label on it. It says, factory error unpainted mustache, Pac ObiWan Kenobi, and it was graded 85. And the paint was appropriately dropped down to an 80% since it did have the overspray on the hands and wrists. It was listed for 495 pounds. It sold for 450 pounds, which is $570 US. That's a big number, but you got to remember that this is a factory error. It's probably a one of one, to be honest with you, in terms of items that have been graded by UKG. This is the first time I've ever seen one with a factory error unpainted mustache. And, you know, it all depends on what you like and what you collect, but I'm a big fan of the Spanish figures, so I can understand the appeal on it. I actually sent this one out to my Patreon supporters, and they bought most of these, I gotta say. So I like it. I think it was an awesome figure. I was very tempted myself, to be honest, but I held off. I held off because I ended up buying this one. This is the UKG 85%. Very tough to find Spanish Pac Lando with the black neck. So you can see right here, the neck is painted black, and it's a very well-known variant for Spanish collectors, and this is the first time I've seen one in such a high grade. What was also unique about this one is that it was a textured cape. So you can see on the cape there, it's not the typical smooth vinyl cape. It's a textured cape that came with this Pac Lando, and it was labeled as such, as the Pac Black Neck Textured Cape, Lando Calrissian. So I did put an offer on this one. The Muffin Man did work with me on this. It has not arrived yet, but it should be here soon, so I'm sure we'll do a close-up of it. It's a made in Hong Kong COO, as all Spanish figures are all Spanish Pac figures are to my knowledge. And it was an 85, 80, 85. Again, I think it was appropriately graded for what it is. But very tough variant. It's one I've been looking for forever. Chris W. over at Rogue 5 Toys, a good buddy of mine, he said, finally you got one, so now you can shut up about it, John. And he's right. I've been looking for this one for several years in high grade. Very happy to be getting this one. Hopefully it arrives safe and sound. But I also paid 450 pounds for that one. Next up is the Spanish Pac Bosque, and this is the non-toxic limbs variant of the Spanish Pac This is the brown-green limbs versus the toxic green limbs that we all know that's fairly rare. This is one I don't have in my collection, but this was another one picked up by my Patreon supporters at 450 pounds, 570 US dollars. So hopefully another one pops up at some point in the future when I have enough money for it. But I was looking at this one, I was looking at the Kenobi, and I was looking at the Black Neck Lando. I decided on the Lando just because I've been looking for that one forever and may not find that one again for another couple of years. Who knows? Knowing my luck, another one will pop up a week from now, but it's just one of those very tough variants that I had to get. Next up, we got some other Spanish figures that were at auction. This is the Pac Han Solo Bespin, and this one obviously had quite a bit of wear to it. You can see the wear on the hair as well as on the hands, and it was graded UKG 75%. That one sold for 107 pounds, which is 136 US dollars. This was the Spanish Pac light brown bandolier version of the Tusken Raider. This was graded UKG 80%, and it was listed for 395 pounds. It sold for 325 pounds, which is 412 US dollars, and which is a little bit less than what I paid, a lot less actually than what I paid for my AFA 80 example for this exact same figure. So congratulations to my Patreon supporter who picked that one up. That's just one that's very tough to find, usually doesn't pop up very often, and when it does, it sells very quickly. So congrats on that one. But again, that one did sell for 325 pounds, which is 412 US dollars. Another very tough one to find. I don't see these pop up regularly at all either. This was a UKG 85% pale hands Pac for the Ugot Piggy Boy. Piggy Boy, it's in a Spanish Pac figure. This is probably the toughest COO to find for the Ugot. And another Patreon supporter picked this one up. It was listed for 495 pounds and sold for 400 pounds, which is 507 US dollars. So these early Spanish Pacs and even some of the later PBPs, they are very pricey variants. It's not one that you want to go down that rabbit hole unless you've got some pockets, deep pockets, because they're very sought after. It's kind of like the new Lily Letty. 5 years ago, it was all about the made in Mexico Lily Lettys. Lettys now are kind of, people have kind of moved on from them, and the prices have really dropped for those. But Spanish Pac figures, they remain very, very expensive, especially in very high grade, just because they're known to have weak welds, really bad paint applications, and just tough to get in high grade. Next up, this is a dark pouch, dark blue eyes PBP Chewbacca. So it's a little bit of a different label that you can see there. Sometimes they label this as the circle on foot or the floating D, but this is a different label that I had not seen before from UKG, or I forgot about it. But this was graded UKG 80% and sold for 105 pounds, which is 133 US dollars. So this is a dark pouch, dark blue eyes PBP, and here's a close look at it. Some of the PBPs have lighter eyes, and this one just happens to have the darker kind of purplish pouch, and it did sell for $133. Next up is the PBP Stormtrooper, hard torso. Usually, it's not labeled as such on this one, but usually it's known to have kind of a hard plastic torso, graded UKG 80%. That one also sold for 175 pounds, which is 222 US dollars. Really nice example, no discoloration, not much discoloration, I should say. This arm looks like it has a little bit of discoloration, and probably why it got the 80%. Next up is a tough to find in high grade PBP Imperial Commander. Usually these have a lot of wear, especially around the brim of the hat, as well as on the belt buckle. One little scratch on the belt buckle, but that was it. Very clean figure. Usually they're about a 75 or maybe a low 80 grade. This one was graded 85%, figure 90, paint 85. That one sold in an auction for 156 pounds, which is about 200 US dollars. Another very fair price for what it was. Usually, again, they're very tough to find in clean condition because the paint is kind of tacky and it does rub off really easily on the brim of that hat especially. So very good deal on that one. That's the highest graded PBP I've seen in a while for the Imperial Commander. Next up, the always desirable Tri-Logo PBP Light Blue Boba Fett. This one had the painted knee and the unpainted dart. So there's several different variations for the belt color. Sometimes this little shin piece can come painted or unpainted, and the same thing for the dart. painted or unpainted. This one, you know, is one of the more common variations with the painted shin piece as well as the unpainted dark with the dark brown, almost black color belt color. And this one sold in an auction. It was a UKG 80% for 297 pounds, which is 377 US dollars. Nice example on that one. Here was the pink face PBP Han Solo Hoth. And there's also a pale face with kind of a dark purple. This one looks to be the dark purple, but it has the pinkish face. Lots of wear to it. I'm surprised it got the 80%, to be honest with you. It had wear to the foot, wear to the hands, as well as some wear to the face. I probably personally would have given this one a 75. It's not a bad figure, though, for the price. 82 pounds, 104 US dollars. Really good deal, even though, in my opinion, it was slightly overgraded. But that's okay. It's tough to find any of these Spanish figures in high grade, and that's a price I would have paid for all day long, whether it was graded 75 or 80%. Very good figure. Next up is another very desirable variant. This is the dark tan pants Han Solo Hoth outfit, Hong Kong COO. And we documented one last year that was also an AFA 85 that sold at auction for over $380. So I sent this one to my Patreon supporters, and I said, this is a pretty good deal. You know, it's listed for $300. There was one that sold in the same grade for a higher price at $380 in an auction earlier last year. It was listed for $300, and it sold for $270. So over $100 less than what one sold for last year. Now, admittedly, it did have a little scratch on the hand right there. The rest of the figure was very clean, but this is a very desirable variant. I actually picked one of these up UKG 85% on Facebook in the Deal or No Deal group. So that one is on the way to me as well. It has not arrived, but we'll take a look at that one when it comes as well. So anyway, good price on that one, I thought, for an AFA 85. Now we're going to dig into some Last 17. And let me tell you, as I mentioned in a recent Mint on Card video, Last 17 Luke Stormtrooper disguise has really jumped in price. And I've got several different examples that sold here that were both UKG graded as well as AFA graded. This one was a UKG 85% and sold for 728 pounds, which is $925. So that one has really jumped. Last year, I would say that a UKG 85% was more like $650. Now it's going for $925. As crazy as that one is, here is a UKG 90%. This is one I had in my What to Buy video, and the price was pretty astounding. It sold for 1,329 pounds, which is 1,690 US dollars. That is a massive, massive number. And this is kind of like Mint on Card prices. We just documented in a Mint on Card market update a beater tri-logo that sold for 1,000 US dollars. And here we are for a loose graded, admittedly it's a 90% from UKG, that sold for $1,690. Absolutely massive number. And then here was an AFA 80 plus Luke Stormtrooper that sold for $1,300 in an auction. So they have really jumped. It's pretty incredible to see the jump in price, even despite what I would call a slowdown in collectibles generally. And in general, loose graded figures, I would say for the most part, unless you're talking about rare Spanish variants like we just covered, loose graded variants have really, for the most part, dropped in price a little bit. But that is not true for Luke Skywalker Stormtrooper. Absolutely massive numbers. Now we've got a UKG 90% Imperial Gunner, beautiful case style. This one sold in an auction for 266 pounds, which is 338 US dollars. Now, I thought that was a really good deal relative to an AFA 90. This is an AFA 90, which this price is actually lower than the last one that sold. So I sent this one out to my Patreon supporters, and I said, hey, look, I know it's expensive, but it is an AFA 90, and the last AFA 90 sold for $660 plus taxes and shipping. So this one was an AFA 90 listed for $600, and I said, I know it's a lot of money, but one just sold for 10% higher, and someone did buy it. So this was an AFA 90. Tough to get this one in a 90 grade, and it did sell for $600. So, again, it all depends on what you collect. There's some collectors that do not collect UKG graded, loose graded items. That's fine. That's your choice. But you're going to be paying a big premium relative to a UKG 90. This UKG 90 sold for $338, and the AFA 90 sold for $600. And, you know, it's just, everybody's got their own thing, but it is a pretty big premium going from a UKG 90 to an AFA 90. Next up was a UKG 85% EV99. This one sold in an auction for 240 pounds, which I thought was a good deal given that that's the price that these can sell for ungraded, at least here in the US. That's $305 US. Next up, we had an AFA 85 Plus that sold for 323 pounds, which is $410. Again, that's a price I would have paid all day long. So again, here's another comparison of UKG versus AFA. The AFA 85 Plus sold for $410 US. The UKG 85 sold for $305. So pretty close. It's not nearly the big disparity that we saw with the Imperial Gunner or the Luke Stormtrooper, but just an interesting comparison. Next up, we had a UKG 85% a Monomon. That one sold in an auction for 255 pounds, which is $324 US. Again, it's a lot cheaper over in the UK. Here in the US, an Monomon is going to go for a lot more money. This one, you know, 324. You know, I've seen very regularly these sell for that price ungraded. So that's a really good deal there. Next up was an AFA 85 that sold for $400. I thought that was a good price as well. Very fair price, just given that $300 to $350 is kind of the going rate for loose ungraded figures. And maybe I got to adjust my expectations, but to me, that seemed like a really good deal. Next up, we had a AFA 85 Han Solo in Carbonite. That one sold for 210 pounds, which is $268 US. Very good price on that one. And then here was a UKG 90% that sold for 256 pounds, which is $325 US. So again, one was in the US, one was in the UK, but they sold for about the same price despite the difference in grading company. This one, again, was a UKG 85, sold for $325, and then the AFA 85 sold for $268. So it's not a huge price difference, very similar to the Monomon situation. And then finally, we had a UKG 85% Yakface, brand new case style, and I sent this one out to my Patreon supporters. I thought this was a great deal. It was listed for 550 pounds and sold for 500 pounds, which is $634 US dollars. You know, that's the make an offer price that it sold for. And again, here in the US, I've seen as high as $850 for an ungraded Yakface. So to get that one for $634 US dollars or 500 pounds, very fair price, just given what these can go for in an auction, loose graded. So anyway, lots of interesting sales out there for Last 17 and Spanish Pox especially. I wanted to kind of cover it all in one big video. I do have some other loose graded sales that happened that are on my watch list that I did not have time to cover in this video, but we'll get to it when I can. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.